Well, everybody, welcome back to another episode of our Of Impact podcast here. This is going to follow up with a four-part series that Chris has been putting together for everybody, talking about exiting businesses, kind of the different kind of exit. So we're going to dig in and talk through some of those scenarios today. So we appreciate you joining us. So let's go ahead and just jump right into it. The topic of the day is selling a business as usual, but there's two that we're really going to focus on. I know your series was a four-part series, but the two that we're going to focus on today are a partner level and a manager level buyout is one, and then a family buyout or essentially passing the torch down the generation. So
Right,
what are
right.
your where do you want to get started?
Yeah, I mean these two types of transactions are when you talk to people and I've talked to a lot of private business owners, these two types of transactions are usually the type that they would prefer. In fact, surveys are put together every so often about asking business owners that are engaging in exit planning what their preferred method of selling is. And these two, selling to a key, consortium within the management team or a partner in the business, and then also after that, selling to family members if they're able to, are the two most commonly desired outcomes. And I think that there's some real practical and obvious reasons why that is. But so, it's not uncommon if you've been an entrepreneur for years, if it's a generational business. And in some cases, and we'll get into this more, just the type of business it is and the nuances related to the company itself and the risks that that business owner has to take along the way. Only people that are kind of have been on the inside, and behind the curtain for years would really get it and feel comfortable taking those risks on. So, anyways, those are some of the things that we're going to talk about through these.
No, that makes a ton of sense because when you really pull back the curtain and you understand the business, or at least you think you do, so that makes sense. I
Yeah.
know I don't know what the most common type is, but I know probably like what most people like families they start a business and like the dream
Hmm.
is to pass it down to their kids, sell it to their kids. Like that's probably
Yeah.
the most common like small business world that I've heard people say like is that the number one like actually executed transaction or what's the most common one that actually goes through?
The most common is if there isn't, if there's kind of a patriarch or a matriarch in the family and they're not able to pass it down to their family, the most common after that is just selling to a third party. And even with that, and we'll get to this in another, episode, but the valuation differential can be huge. And so a lot of times the reason for selling usually have to do with lifestyle and life choices and life circumstances. And, estate planning comes into the picture a lot with that. And so trying to top tick the valuation of your company is critical for them. So that's usually the most commonly executed deal, is sale to a third party. But like you were saying, and you actually are a great one to talk about this too, because you've had businesses in your family. And when you have, like you said, parents or grandparents or even great grandparents starting companies and running them for years, they've not only provided for your family, they've provided summer jobs for their kids and grandkids and maybe some of their friends. And they've just had that role throughout the years. And so um, you know the business takes on more than just its own sort of purpose in whatever it sells or services that it provides. And I think that's one reason why keeping it in the family is so desirable if possible. I mean, what was your experience there?
No, it makes sense. I don't know if I've actually ever told you this or not, but the one of the businesses that my family had, it was like essentially my grandparents and to my mom and dad. And it was actually my grandpa's first job as well. So I think he worked there when he was like 14. It was like an
Oh,
8
wow.
p.m., a tiny little service station back in the, I don't know, 40s or 50s, whatever that was.
Hmm.
So it was, well, I guess I just aged him, not the 40s, probably the 50s, but it was like, so he worked there as his first job, and then eventually, like at some point, got enough money working other jobs to then buy it. And it was, it was just funny that that business had really just exited my family for the first time for like, I don't know, 60, 70 years kind of deal. So it was it is interesting, but and it was where me and my brother, like my parents, worked on it or different levels of businesses and stuff, but like we just didn't want to take it over really, or we didn't want to buy
Hmm.
it. Like we went our own way. I moved across the country and but I
Yeah.
worked there for years. My brother worked there. I mean, my actually
Right.
after they sold it, my brother still worked there for a while, so he doesn't
Okay.
anymore. But it was, yeah, where maybe initially the thought was to do that, but it like just didn't fit our scenario or what we were wanting to.
Right.
We went in to go do our own thing, kind of deal. So,
Well, and talk about that a little more because I think that is one of the biggest reasons why selling to family becomes a challenge, even though it's one of the most desirable things from the seller, from the owner. What position were you in personally in your life, and your brother at the point at which, your mom and I know there've been multiple businesses, but you could probably speak to the fact that the children or the ones that would be successors aren't necessarily in a position to take it over or desiring to take it over at at the point in time in the owner's life when that would be appropriate.
100%. Like when I got out of school and then I went to be a pilot and worked for the airlines, like I left and if at that very moment, I don't know if I would have tried to take it over or buy it, or I don't know if, if it was available then, but my parents were still very young and like, they weren't even
Hmm.
thinking about selling. And of course it was always the opportunity, if we wanted to, but like I got to go out and like kind of find what I wanted to do in life. And here we are,
Hmm.
Lisa and I built the business and sold it. And we actually sold it before my mom sold her stuff. It's kind of like the encouragement to see, that and then do it. But yeah, my parents were really good and like, hey, how can we support you? What do you want to do? Stuff like that. But I think a lot of people, they just assume their kids want it. Like they want to follow in their footsteps,
Yeah.
and it might not always be the case, but it's sometimes like it'd be hard to tell your parents like, hey, I don't want to do that, like
Yeah.
I think a lot of parents or grandparents or whatever, they think, best intentions, they want to build something and pass it down,
Right.
but it's probably not the smartest decision for the entire family to do it through the business. Maybe you sell the business and help them in another way, kind of deal. So
Right. Yeah. I mean, people are so unique just in their makeup and experiences that like you said, the children, instead of working in the company when they were younger and in a role where they were shadowing mom and dad, maybe they didn't get along with mom and dad that well. I'm not saying that was your case, but like you could see it, a situation where, kids and parents, there's naturally conflict there. And um, it's hard enough to just sort of live in some cases as kids get older, day to day, clean up your room. But when the directive comes down that you need to kind of follow dad as the boss at the company or mom,
right.
that could create its own set of issues that people can understand. And so, yeah, I mean, it just, even though it's usually more desirable because you could see the asset transferring and staying within the family and continuing to provide for, children, grandchildren, their spouses, it's often not the most executed deal.
Right. And if it, I think you put risk on there just because family and business don't always go hand in hand. So if the business deal goes south, then there's times that the family relationship goes south too, like
Hmm.
if that
Hmm.
deal wouldn't go through. Like my dad had a auto repair for years, and like if I that was the only thing I was ever really interested in, and I worked there for years and like love cars, love turning wrenches, but he forgot more than I ever knew. So like if I would have tried to take that over, like there's no
Yeah.
way that that was going to, maybe I understand marketing better than he did, but I
Hmm.
guarantee I don't understand, the
Yeah.
numbers and certain things. So that would have been a case where like that just wouldn't have went well, because
Right.
I couldn't have, maybe I could have learned and that stuff, but it would have, the business would have slipped because he went to school for that and had years and years and years of experience. So to like me to step in there someday and do it, it
Yeah.
would have not been
That's
as
right.
to do.
No, that's right. And I think that it leads to the next logical topic, which is uh, there can be like funding challenges for selling the company. I mean, some businesses do so well that the family can pocket cash flow along the way, and it's just not an issue. And there's, whatever, seven, 8 figures already stacked up by the time they're ready to do this. And they're kind of transitioning that to the next generation. But if there isn't, and it's really just provided in a material way for the ongoing, then when the time comes to monetize that asset, the cash flow for it has to come from a couple places. It either has to come from the family that's saved up to make that transfer, which usually they won't ask for you to do that. Um, or it would have to come from outside funding. And so if the business has to continue to provide for that, consideration for the deal to
Right.
the sellers, like if they're wanting mom and dad want to retire, then yeah, that has to be done in a creative way that still provides for everybody.
Right. And essentially they're depending on how much they've, saved and what they've done along the way, a good chunk of their like retirement is tied to the success of their kids possibly operating that business still, like if
Right.
you sell to a third party, it's like, well, the family's got their money, they're able to retire and go out and do the things that they, want to do in retirement or start a new business or do whatever they want to do.
Yep.
But if you
Yep.
tie it, like put all your eggs in that basket of like, well, my kid or niece or nephew, whoever it is going to buy this over the next 10 years. Well, what if the market changes? What if they just,
Right.
they're just not the businessman that you were? Um,
Right.
it's like, I think when you do that, you bring a lot more, you carry a lot more risk forward versus when you exit, like, yeah, I mean, depending on the size of your business, it's like the most amazing weight off your chest when you started it, grew it, sold it, and you're like, sweet, I'm going to the Bahamas now.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
it's
Yeah. The responsibility's gone and you're able to transition that on. I mean, but so there are challenges. Like I know a business owner, and he has been highly successful. It's been in for now 3 generations, and he never had biological children, but he was fortunate enough to adopt 3 children along the way, and they have no interest in the company, and so it's just he and his brother. His brother didn't have any children, was never married, and so now it's a question, and so the most logical thing going forward is, like you said, if it doesn't make sense to transition that business to the girls, which he would have been delighted to if they had been interested in it,
right.
then the most logical next step would be either, you know, he and his brother selling to management inside the company or selling to a third party, whether that's another strategic in his own industry or private equity sponsor.
That makes sense. There's a lot of when we like break these two topics out, or not topics, but we break these two kind of deal structures out, family
Yeah.
management. There's a ton of similarities that go in,
Hmm.
or potential pros and cons for both of these deals, where like the management, and family potentially has the inside look at the business, where or maybe they've been in it for years and have an idea to understand it.
Yep.
But what would you say would be a big, is there any big differentiator between say a management buyout or a partner buyout and a family deal? Like, is there anything that really kind of where you see them, at a crossroads where they tend to go differently?
Um, well, I've had more experiences with the challenges in like family deals. If you have husband and wife or husband and sorry, father and children, negotiating those deals or the more family that's been involved, let me just say it that way. The more family can you imagine trying to do a deal around the Thanksgiving table, like where you have so many people that are interested in what's going to happen, or if it can happen where, dad or grandpa died and now the beneficiaries are having to think unexpectedly are they're now having to think through what to do with the company. And even if they're thinking about selling to a third party, all those decisions with family can just become, a challenge to weed through. The biggest issues that I've seen with partner buyouts and family, but family, it's a little easier to navigate, but is how do you take partners that aren't necessarily equal? They might be equal in the company status, but they aren't necessarily equal in their financial wherewithal to do a transaction and bring them together and get that done. Because you also have, people that are willing to take more risk than others. They naturally had different functions at the company. Like if you have a sales guy at the company being part of the buyout team, and you have, a guy in the accounting department being part of the buyout team, their heads are wired differently. And maybe the way that they're thinking about risk, the go forward growth opportunities, but even just the way that they manage their own personal money can come into the picture, and their ability to get a deal done at the time that it's needed becomes challenging.
No, that makes a ton of sense because you don't really know, somebody's financial position and they can be drastically different, especially when you're looking to finance a potentially a multi-million dollar asset. You're not looking to buy a small used
Yeah.
car here. So
No, no. I mean, funny story. I did a management buyout transaction several years ago, and the group was made up of four people. And, one guy, was clearly just in a different financial position. So, they were looking to obtain SBA financing to close that transaction among the four of them to buy out the seller. And this one guy was asking, they each had to pony up some money for the equity consideration that would be put into the transaction, and that the bank would then come and fund the rest. And he was looking to fund his piece on a credit card. He's like, "Can I put this on my on my city on my MasterCard here?"
oh geez.
Um, yeah, and
Going for the rewards points, like, yeah, I'll buy a business. What's the credit limit on this thing?
right, it's like, buy now, pay later. So those are some of the biggest challenges. But what one reason why they're so desirable from a seller perspective is, again, you've got people in there that understand the risks. A lot of times with businesses that are doing somewhere between 5 and 50 million a year, you've got serious concentration risks, either from, customers or the contracts that they have. Maybe it's a government contract, um, or, even on the supply side. And you know take finding people on the outside of the business that can quickly become comfortable with those risks is challenging. But when you have people that have been living with it and working and seeing it day to day for years, they're able to get there a lot easier.
That makes sense. So they're probably easier, smoother deals to get done because you don't have to the person doesn't have to come from the outside in and learn about the business and say, what do you sell? What do you do? Where's your, like
Mm.
people from the inside, they already know the supply chain, they already know the advantages and disadvantages of the product. And chances are they probably have ideas already of how to improve it. I don't know
That's
that I've
right.
ever worked for a company and thought, oh well, they're doing this the best way ever. Like if American
Yeah.
Airlines is listening, I got some ideas for you guys. But
Right.
um, it's what I mean. These people probably have something that they think, oh, I can push this, I could grow this, I could
Hmm.
do that. So it's an easier sell, but I guess what you get for on the easy side of that, you lose on the financing side because they're
Hmm.
not going to have the necessarily the same access to capital that a third party, private equity or something like that would have.
Right.
Uh,
Right. And go ahead.
I was just saying on that aspect, like if you had to look at the exact same deal, you know, company XYZ, all the numbers same exact company, you're selling it to management buyout or family for that matter, or a third party. Realistically, who's paying more for it, or where is the seller getting the best terms to walk away from?
Hands down, it's to a third party just every time. I guess there could be some structural components in the deal that become, more pleasant to live with when you're dealing with a partner buyout or with family. But on the whole, 9 times out of 10, you're going to get a higher valuation with a third party deal. And, a lot of times that's because, you have financial sponsors or you have corporate like strategic buyers coming in, and they're going to look at the expense lines and they're going to cut stuff. They're looking to make it as lean as possible. They're going to change it. And so the transition for those that are already there might be a lot bumpier too.
So,
So one reason why they can pay more is also going to be the reason why the culture could change, because, those that are there now may not survive through the transaction long term. And, I would say almost every business owner that I talk to is concerned about that. They care about that because they care
yeah,
about their people.
that makes sense. And realistically, if you've spent years in the business and haven't cared about your people, you probably aren't as successful. You know what I mean? Like
Yep.
if you
Hmm.
really take care of them. So it's a balance, it sounds like, from what your employees or your partners or you know
Right.
however your business whatever you're doing, how they get treated throughout the sale process or you know to a new buyer
Right.
versus well at the end of the day it's still my retirement or my you
That's
know
right.
so you kind of have to balance that.
Yep.
um,
And whether you're
yeah,
doing a deal for, a $40 million rubber manufacturer who has a team of 20 people, um, or if you're doing with an outside party, or if you're, running a transaction, looking at the merger for a, $25 billion insurance company, there comes a meeting in every deal where you sit down and you start filling in boxes. You look at who's there now and you start looking at what does this guy do? And what does this person do? And how much do they get paid? And it's all for the analysis of cost savings and where there's overlap and what's necessary and who can go with the deal and who won't. You don't see that as much with, or hardly at all with, partner buyouts or family transactions.
to do that makes sense.
Mm.
Have you ever seen it? I know, depending, like, you know, I grew up in a small town, so like rumors are always strong and you know, everything's kind of got to be kept secret. But have you ever seen that became a problem? Like, you know, as a business owner, like your employees may not know that you're thinking about selling. Have you ever, like, I guess, how do you approach them to say, hey, I might sell this. Are you guys interested? Without
Oh yeah.
risking um them saying, well, you know, we don't want it, and now we're angry at you for selling,
Uh-huh.
or where the work in the production kind of starts to
Yeah.
slack. Have you ever seen anything like that in your career?
Oh yeah. It needs to start. That's one reason why these, exit planning as much as possible just really should start, just years in advance. I read something today that it's kind of like 1,000-day plan, ideally. It's not going to happen in every case,
Right,
but at that point, when you're starting that far out, you know who your superstars are, you know who your go-to people are, you know who's exhibited that level of I'm just an employee here, but I act like I own it. I act like an owner.
right,
Or just from living living with your kids, whether or not they have the constitution to take it over. So those conversations can start to happen slowly along the way. Um, and then it leads to, the next step, which is, do you have the interest in doing it? How are you financially set up to do it? There was a transaction I was working, and there were two guys. They were responsible for, this was a partner buyout deal, a management buyout. They each had their own division that they ran. So it made a lot of sense that, those two divisions were the whole company and they would be the ones to succeed the seller. But, not only were they in different spots financially, but they have to be able to get along
Too, right.
too, and I think over time leading up to and through these discussions, that was one of the things that came out a lot, which is, these two guys really don't see eye to eye. And it's okay, business actually can be better for that too, but it's like it's more just a personality thing too, that they're just not going to get along.
Right. It can take a whole different, being coworkers versus being business partners. It's
Right.
different. You maybe still have the same positions, but
Yeah.
it certainly is different. Like we wanted to tell, like we had, part-time warehouse people and people who work for us. Like we wanted to give them as much of a heads up as possible, but we knew there was always the risk, like the day that we say, hey, we're going to sell the company, we don't know
Yeah.
when, like we're going to sell, we don't know how long it's going to take and stuff, that they would say, well, I'm going to go get a new job, peace out. And
Right.
one of them did and like moved back to Utah. And so then we were like shorthanded for a while. And it is,
Yeah.
and the one of the other ones that stayed around, which is really good. We like just really like the kid, he's out of high school and we then went and bought like essentially bought him a small business, like bought a trailer to detail cars. That's what he wanted to do.
Oh, cool.
So
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
bought the trailer, the pressure wash unit, all the supplies, school, like everything. And it's like, here you go, for work. He was really good for I don't know how long he worked for us, 2 years, something like that. He was
Yeah.
a really dependable. And it's like, we gave him like a bonus. And then here it's like it's all paid for if you want, you have an interest in this. So like we were able to like because we knew when we sold they were moving warehousing, they were
Yeah.
done, that they were going to be out of job, so we
Yeah.
didn't want to just do that, like, but at the end of the day we couldn't keep running a company for 30 years so he could have a job, like
Right.
um
Right. Well, and that's an interesting point you bring up. It's something that we can talk about because it's more appropriate with selling to third parties. When you have partner deals and when you have family deals, the incentive to provide like, transitional bonuses or stay bonuses, or just to keep people in their seat doing the job that you need them to do you don't have the same, conflicts and pressures there that you do like when in your situation, but you ended up paying it out, what I would say, like in kind. It wasn't just straight up cash, but you set them up, but that was still doing the same thing. You were keeping them in place, and it was a way of saying thank you, but it was also a structural element of your deal that you did.
exactly. And yeah, we debated, and it's like, yeah, I remember when I was 19 or 20, it would have been best if some, I mean, I guess I was 20 at that point, but yeah, I wasn't going to just write him a check. Wanted to help him like advance his life, and
Nice.
like, we always believe that. So he still does it. And maybe
Cool.
if he listens to this, maybe he'll give me a discount, but I'm like, I thought I'd get at least free detailing after this, but not the case, but at least he does a good job with it. So
Not you, money bags. You have the money to pay,
yeah, right.
right?
Oh, he
But you asked too about the differences. I mean, there have been surveys and studies done that are not, hard to find, but usually sellers will achieve at least 20% more with selling to a third party than they will with either of these two structures.
it makes it
Um,
it
yeah.
makes a ton of sense with the financing and I mean, because if you're really paying, your family or partners that much that they would be able to afford to, compete with like a private equity, then, I gotta ask yourself how much you're paying out. But like
Hmm.
you could essentially sell to a third party, and take 10% of that and take care of your employees that were there and still walk away with more,
Yeah.
more money kind of deal or something along those
Hmm.
lines. I guess it's a really good, if you think about it though, not every business is sellable to a third party. There's some very unique ones, or maybe
Yep.
not an interest from a,
Right.
PE firm.
Yep.
Um, so I guess both of these kind of offer flexibility on getting a deal done. Really, I mean, if you think about it.
It really does. And it's almost like It has to be done this way. If you business owner are going to transition into this next phase of your life, whatever that is, it has to be done this way because, there's one client that I have now, and I actually helped him with a transaction 2 years ago, and he was buying the deal. He was buying the company from the then current owner who had had it for like 30 years. But I say to him all the time, I'm like, you're literally one of the only people on the planet that that was qualified to buy this company because you knew that business and you knew that market so well and you were willing to take those risks.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I know the deal you're talking about, I think, and he's done a good job with it. Like it was one of those
Yeah.
situations where this worked out for everybody
Yep.
involved, where the seller was able to sell and the buyer was actually able to take his plan and execute and really move it in the right direction. So it's like
Right.
maybe
Yep.
ask him, interview him someday, and it's like the pinnacle transaction of what you want a deal to, how you want it to go through kind of deal.
Yeah. And he's a great example for lots of reasons because, they say that when's the best time to start thinking about selling your company? And it's the day that you buy it. And that's not right now what he's thinking about, but he's taken that approach, which is I want to do the best with this asset in
Yeah.
every step along the way for lots of different reasons. But when he
And
bought the company, yeah, that was a big piece of it.
and if you really do it with that in mind, and it's, a lot of this is, it would be the same as building a proper company. Like every decisions you make, if you start thinking about that,
Yeah,
they're going to help you in the short term too, like just,
right.
maybe accounting being clean. That's one thing I know I'm sure both seen. It's like, well, I'm just going to run my business. So, well, cool. Let's look at your books. Oh, I haven't seen those for years. Well, like it's not helping anybody, like,
Hmm.
maybe you're not planning on exiting right now, but if you had clarity into that sort of stuff, it would help you along the way as well. So
Right, right.
proper. But I've been in those shoes where it's easy to push that stuff aside because there's no time. There's, like if you buy a business or you start a business, like you're working what feels to be, 18 hours a day. So like I get
Yeah.
why some of that gets pushed aside, but that's where it really, like you said, the planning from day one and having people that help you along the way, keep you accountable is always a benefit as well.
Yep. Yep. Yeah, and with that, just thinking about that one management buyout that we were just referring to, there are a couple people that are still there. So there was much smoother transition out of the gate, with the employees that were already there when it took place. There's more now because it's grown, which is phenomenal. And the deal terms were very flexible to reach. Now, I will say it took months to achieve to get the final terms and to sign the documents. But that's also one of the benefits of the deal because you have the flexibility of continue to just, turn it over with the seller and work through it. And you understand that you're working towards that. You're trying to rule it in. You're not trying to rule it out. You're trying to see how you can get it done. You're not trying to see how you won't get it done.
Right.
And so there were a lot of great features in that deal, both from transitioning of the employees that were already there, just kind of seamless, and then also the deal terms that they were able to get in place were very good too.
Makes sense. And it's really like, I mean, a necessity for some sellers where it's so specialized that if not, like, what do you do with it, right? If it's
Right.
and luckily, he had a good, successor that was able, not, family, but that was actually able to take that business. Because I
Right.
mean, no matter what, even if you get paid out and you get bought out, like you still, you build a company, like you still have an emotional connection to it. You
Oh
really,
yeah.
you like want to see it do good. And so when somebody buys it, and yeah, sure, maybe you were completely paid out, but if you see them, the new owner, run it into the ground, like
Right.
you still got your money, but it doesn't,
I
like
know.
it's not exciting for anybody to see that sort of thing.
Right.
But
There's one thing I want to kind of touch on here that a lot of people might not know, but with partner buyouts, management buyouts, and I think probably even selling to family, the way to finance these deals, if it's small enough, I will say, if it's a very big deal, that's just another animal altogether. But if it's under call it $8 million of enterprise value, you can often use SBA financing to take out those parties, and the SBA and the banks that underwrite those transactions look very favorably on them. They underwrite them differently, and they're willing to finance those in some cases up to 100% of the buyout. And what I'm talking about there is like if you and I were 50-50 partners in a deal in a company, and the company was worth $10 million at the time that we did that deal, and I was going on to do my own thing for some other reason, um, they would be willing to finance your buyout up to 100% of that half.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
Are they able to do they finance it that way because of the experience that you have with the business already? Like, is that why they're willing to go
Yeah. Hmm.
finance or underwrite the deal differently?
Yeah, you're so invested in it already, and your
That
knowledge there, is already so well seasoned.
that
Yeah.
makes a ton of sense. What I guess what would be any other takeaways that you would want to, or I guess two questions. First off, I'm curious, what's the, family wise, what's the longest you've ever seen or dealt with a business that, stayed inside the family generation after generation, Like how have you ever seen one that was
Hmm.
multi-generational or, essentially kind of where do you see them typically exit?
Oh, yeah. It's like a 30-year cycle, 25 to 30 years. And I've seen some that were in the third generation.
That's
Um,
cool.
yeah. So yeah, it's really great to see that. And, a lot of times the way those deals go down is that it's either a C corp or an LLC or S corp, and they're either transitioning the stock of the company or the membership units to the family, and they do it over time. And so it's a gradual buyout in many cases, that it can also be done over time, over like the course of time. And so the flexibility in those type of deal terms are very helpful too, because where if you were selling to a third party, you might not like the idea of getting bought out over 10 years, let's say.
Right.
But if you were selling to your son or daughter in the next generation, that 10 years would not just be a nice way of phasing out and paying for the company, your equity piece and getting paid for the company, but it would also be a great way for them to shadow you and make sure that you're able to transfer the full body of knowledge that they need to carry it on.
That makes sense. Oh,
Yeah.
Alicia was telling me about one of her clients that she'd worked with in the past, a very, very successful one. I don't remember the exact date, but I think it's been in the family since like 1890 or something like that.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, that was like you do not see that often. That was, I mean, and they're
Right.
still growing. I mean, they're doing I don't know what they put in the water out there, but they do a
Eh.
good job with it.
Well, and
So,
you think about it too, like how progressive they must have been when they started. Because I think I know the transaction or the company you're talking about, and I would call it like the personal care and cosmetic space, uh, in a
yeah,
sense.
yep,
In 1890, people are vain. They've always been caring about their appearance, but how much more now, in comparison to then when they started.
exactly. And there's like, I remember with like Live Infly and like t-shirts, hats, stuff like that, you put like, the established and whatever date. And I remember like I think it was 2014. And it's like you put that on your shirt and you're like, okay, wow, now they think we did just start, right? Which we did. But like a company like that, it's like since 1890, there's not a
Right.
lot of those, and let alone ones that have stayed in small families and successful. I mean, it's really like a
Yeah.
It's pretty impressive thing that they've been able to accomplish.
Right. Right.
That makes a ton of sense. So I mean, there's kind of what you end up leaving, or if you listen to this and think about today, there's a tons of commonality between a partner and a management buyout as to with a family deal.
Mm-hmm.
Some flexibility in deal terms. I mean, you have the option to sell you can sell transactions that maybe would struggle to sell otherwise,
Right.
like the one we talked about. You can potentially it's a smoother transition for like your employees, or if that's what really matters to you. The overarching concept is or theme is it potentially works in those aspects, but financing wise, it may not be the best structure. Depending on the exact situation, you might be able to get more for your business depending on what's a
Right.
priority for you.
Right.
Um, but what would you say would be another like big con to these if you have the opportunity to do both, or one or the other, if you're gonna a management buyout to say like a third party transaction,
Mm-hmm.
what would be another thing that they should consider when they're making their decision?
Oh, yeah. Well, I think the biggest thing with both of these is, and it's kind of the most obvious, and that's that the pool of buyers is just very small. It's limited to other people in the family, or it's limited to who you already know there at the company. And just in private transactions, we always say that, it's not like you can look on the screen and see the stock of your company fluctuating throughout the course of the market day. You know,
Right.
the only way to really know the valuation of your company, I mean, you can have a third party service come in and value the company, and it's kind of like valuing your house. They'll appraise it, they'll look at comps, they'll do the best with the information they have. But the truth is with private, small and lower middle market transactions, that just isn't published like home sales are published in the public
Right.
records, you know? And so the only way to really know what the value is of your company is to take it to the more broadly out to the market. And when you're dealing with a limited number of potential buyers because they either work at the company or they're in your family, yeah, it's just a different analysis because you're not going to be getting the market's view.
Right. No, that makes a ton of sense. And I wasn't thinking about that one, but 100% when we sold, it was like the people that you brought to the table. It's like, where are they from? Oh, they're from this country. It's like from all over. And
Yeah.
then I don't know, three or four offers at one time, you have them all side by side essentially. And you're like, they were all so different, everybody like, and maybe the net
Hmm.
value of the entire deal, but how they structured it, it was, it was interesting to see that for the first time of really how that worked, and then
Yeah.
kind of find out what matters to you. Now, I suppose you could take that. Could you take that transaction or that dollar amount or that opportunity to your management team then and say, hey, we're going to sell the company. This is what we want for it and why.
Hmm.
I mean, have you ever seen that, or does that work? Or do you just, I guess, when do you make the decision to say, I'm going to try third party or I'm going to try management buyout?
Yeah. It usually follows in the exit planning that I do with my clients. It usually follows the path that the owner will be able to have these discussions with his or her team along the way. And so by the time they get to somewhere like T minus 24 months or 18 months out, even 12 for that matter, they already know whether or not this group is going to be able to do it.
Yeah.
um that's one of the benefits of working with an advisor too, like me, because I can bring the body of knowledge from the third party market to bear on the analysis. I can say, well, if we took this out, this is what it would look like.
Yeah.
And so that allows my clients, that's what allows the sellers to be able to have those discussions early on and see what they're sacrificing in terms of valuation versus structural elements and transition and employee retention.
No, that makes a ton of sense. And it's probably like if you think about it, you're from the seller side of it, you're wearing two hats because you're their boss, right? You know, while you own the company,
Right.
but so it's your employee that who you're also negotiating a deal with. So like
Mm-hmm.
probably is really good to have a third party, a neutral third party in the center there that can work that negotiation back and forth because
Mm-hmm.
inevitably if those break down, well, they're still your employee. They're what's bringing value to your business potentially.
Mm-hmm.
They do. So it's like, I guess it's a slope that you need to like tread carefully on to make sure that it's done professionally and not like,
Right.
especially in terms of valuation where it is so subjective or it's so, it can be different where, if you have two people that are on polar opposites, like that's maybe creates animosity unless there's some validity behind it to say, okay, well, the
Yeah.
third party market would have this on this deal. So
Right. Right.
that
Yeah.
makes
And you're only really going to know that if you either go through the process entirely, and commit to that, or if you have someone like an advisor, like us, come in and be able to tell you from experience and also from current market, experience with the current market.
to do. That makes
Yeah.
sense. Have you ever seen, one of these where they end up maybe thinking they're going to go to the partner or family buyout and then end up, pivoting later down the road and doing like a third party exit?
Um, I've seen it, yes, and like you said, that can create conflict. And so when I've seen that, it's actually made it so that the deal that they were working out, they had to replace the guy in the end,
Yeah. That's
because and it gets to what you were talking about earlier, where yeah, it's just conflicts of interest. And once they're brought under the tent, they understand that if they can't get it done or they don't want to anymore, that this still is going to happen.
true.
And then when it goes out to the market, they're now in a position where they're still the employee, like you were
Right.
saying, you know?
Yeah, that makes sense. I could understand how that would go south quick because especially it's probably if they can't come up with the money or financing, well, you hold it longer. No, I'm trying to retire now, like or
Yeah.
sooner. So yeah, I'm sure that could be
Yep.
that could make
Yep.
sense. Have you ever seen it, where you got like a third party offer, and then I think of like first right of refusal. I know some of businesses have that if you're a franchise or stuff like that.
Yeah.
Where have you ever seen it where you go get a third party offer, then take that offer to the management team and say, if you're interested, this is what you need to match. Have you ever
Yeah.
any of
Yep.
those deals?
It's a very common, it's a right of first refusal in the buy sell agreements in most operating agreements where you have partnerships. So you see that where, but usually again, that's often not a surprise to the team,
Right.
but it's more one where they've been discussing this for the last several years. You know, I think the the seller wants to get as much as he can. The buyer on the team wants to minimize the valuation as much as they can. I mean, but at the same time, you're negotiating against the value of your own company. So you're either going to go to a third party appraiser of some kind, or you're going to, if you commit to that, finding a third party that would be willing to step in, then you kind of have to be willing to go the full distance either way. And so I have seen that. It just gets messy. It can get messy
To do
like
that makes
that. So again, that's just a situation where it's really helpful to have people that have kind of been through those paces, because there are discussions you'd be better off having sooner, and then knowing that information, making decisions, instead of convoluting it with conflict.
that makes a ton of
Yeah.
sense. That really does. Well, no, I mean, I think that was. I think anybody that's, thinking about one of those two deals, either a partner buyout or the family deal, I think there's a ton of value there for them. And at minimum, you start to think differently because, maybe you have rose-colored glasses on and you're only thinking about this as one thing, but it kind of like there's multiple different things to think about when you're kind of deciding what transaction you
Yeah.
want to do. And that's why I thought it was cool when you put out that um send me that the 4-part blog series that you're doing that kind of breaks these down and looks at it. And yeah, when we sold, like I didn't think through all that. I really didn't. It's just like, hey,
Hmm.
Chris, how do we sell our company? What do we do? Um,
Yeah.
so that was cool. So what are we talking about on the next podcast? What two are we breaking down then?
The next, it would be the last two. I think we'll tackle that. We'll tackle selling to an employee stock ownership plan, an ESOP. Those are acronym. That's an acronym that's thrown around a lot, but I think very few people understand like what it is. And it's also one of the least pursued transaction structures that most private sellers do pursue, but it's an interesting one. And then also selling to a third party, whether that be, it's a party outside the company. It can be a financial investor, or it can be a competitor, strategic buyer of some kind.
Oh, that makes
That's what
sense.
we're going to tackle. Yeah.
And that's essentially what we did, third party. And I feel like everybody personally that I know that's ever sold a business, that's the most common one. Maybe there's, we talked about some of these being very, very common, but I know that third party is probably high up there in the amount, the percentage of transactions that's
Hmm.
completed. So,
Yeah. Right.
well, no, cool.
It
I'm
is.
excited. I'm glad I enjoyed this. I think it was good. So, any last thoughts on wrapping these two up?
Um, just the last thoughts are, um, it's we're always available to discuss, these matters further. We're actually in the process of building an exit planning course that will have much more information, so, that we've been talking about on this call. But if listeners want to reach out and just kick around some of the ideas, the potential pros and cons of each based on their current situation, I'm always happy to do that. So, and the best way I think to reach would be just our of impact advisors .com website, and there's a contact us page there. And we usually get back pretty quickly. So
No, I like it. It sounds good. And yeah, hopefully, I know I remember the first time we had contacted you, so it was like a ton of value there. It really was, and it's a long process, but it is very rewarding. We can attest to that. So.
cool.
Well, cool. Well, we'll be on, I think maybe next week again. We'll film the next part of this, and then yeah, I think that'll be good. And yeah, I'm excited to see what you put together with the exit prep course and kind of all of that. Pull back the curtain even one layer further.
Right.
This whole space.
Great. Well, thanks for having me on, Chad.
Absolutely. Have a good night, Chris.
You too.